The Last of Us HBO series has been a wild ride and is causing people to have emotions ranging from joyous to sobbing to anger. And last week, when The Last of Us released episode number 3, the producers decided to really stray away from the main story of Ellie and Joel, which, to be honest, I really wasn't that big of a fan of. Fortunately, they pulled it back on track with episode 4, which is by far the best episode this season. And if previews are anything to go by, it looks like number 5 is going to actually top it. So we have a lot of good things to look forward to in the Last of Us universe. But before we dive into episode 4, let's briefly recap what happened in episode 3 with Bill and Frank. Now, whatever your religious, political, or personal beliefs are, that's not really what I'm here to talk about. I know this episode has pissed people off because it's a gay love story, but the reason that I didn't prefer this episode was due to the fact that it stole time away from Ellie and Joel. Now, I understand there is some very light character development within Bill and Frank's story that builds towards Joel and Ellie, but if we're being honest, that's really not what the point of that episode was, as it was to focus on Bill and Frank's relationship. But here's the thing, in the game, the way that we meet Bill and how the story unfolds, I never really cared about Bill at all. What I cared about was seeing Joel interacting with Bill's temper and his isolationist attitude, while also becoming a bit defensive of Ellie when Bill started to get frustrated with her. This part of the storyline was and is the birthing of Ellie and Joel becoming close, and Bill was just a plot device to help move that forward, nothing more. So that being said, I genuinely don't give that much of a damn about Bill, and I sure as hell never cared about Frank. Frank was barely mentioned in the game and was merely used to make Bill seem a little bit more human and to kind of remove that asshole nature that he kind of puts up front. And yeah, I know they were gay in the game, or it was at least implied, but then again, I don't really care. What I wish that the episode would have looked like was Ellie and Bill fighting with one another, Ellie, Joel, and Bill navigating through all of Bill's traps to run away from the infected. And I was also hoping to see the whole upside down scene and the first interaction with the bloater in the gym to get the battery for the car. And while I understand that The Last of Us isn't necessarily about zombies or fighting and is a story about relationships, the show deliberately moved focus from the relationship that I wanted to see, which was Joel and Ellie, which is why we all love the game, right? That's why we were pissed when Joel died. Right? Did you buy The Last of Us remaster for the PS5 because of Bill and Frank's excellent adventure? Obviously, you didn't. So that's why I don't really see why we had to do such a deep dive on those characters in general. And one of the reasons that episode 4 was such a standout episode was due to the fact that Ellie and Joel really started to bond, and we're going to talk about why in a little bit. But that bond really happens long before episode 4, at least where they show it. It happens long before that, during the part where they are actually fighting alongside Bill, as this is Ellie's first big brawl with infected and having to help Joel. And of course, I didn't want a one-to-one recreation from the game, but I thought that the producers would stay true to the source material in the sense of keeping the spotlight on Joel and Ellie. And I'm just not a fan of romance in television shows or movies I watch. I'm always fast-forwarding when characters are falling in love or when they're about to kiss. I just don't give a damn about it. It's never really important to the story at all. Maybe, I guess, if somebody betrays another person in the story that you're watching, I suppose then it could be important, but those are just moments that lead to character development or plot twists. Also, I understand that the episode was filmed and edited well. Like, the show is high quality, minus some CGI stuff I have an issue with, but I really just wanted to see more of Joel and Ellie, and I never felt like Bill and Frank were very important. And there's a reason that myself and many others felt that way about the game, because that's how they portray them in the game. They're not relevant, at least not to the level that this episode makes it seem. And if we were going to do a backstory on any character at all, why not about Ellie's life before she was infected? Or how about Tess, or maybe Tommy? And you know, without a shadow of a doubt, there is not going to be any other episodes moving forward that have this level of depth for any other side characters. So what was really the point? I read a lot of comments from people who hadn't even played the game talking about how they were so confused by Bill and Frank being the center of attention, as they were expecting Ellie and Joel to take the lead. But instead, we're introduced to two characters that ultimately die in the end and were nothing more than a path for Ellie and Joel to get through to get where they were going. The scenes with Joel and Ellie at the beginning and the end of the episodes were okay. Nothing really stood out. I found this episode to be overall kind of boring, but I did enjoy how Ellie was really starting to become interested in her tougher side. She wanted to be able to defend herself and Joel if the opportunity presented itself. So she starts to kind of experiment. The episode does begin with Joel and Ellie walking down an old dirt road, and you can see Ellie starting to kind of act like a kid and let go a little bit. And I know I talked about this in the last video, but it's very important to point out that despite all of the terror going on around her, she still finds the ability to be a child, and I think that's awesome. And Joel understands that, and he even lets Ellie know in the next episode. Ellie is just enamored with exploration and getting into things, which is why once her and Joel find the abandoned convenience store where Joel had hid some of his old supplies in case of an emergency, Ellie goes off and finds an old hatch to the basement of the building. While she is exploring, she is looking for some supplies, and she hears an infected. She is initially startled, but realizes that the zombie is trapped under some rubble. This is when she begins to experiment, like I was just saying, by slicing the zombie's skin and then ultimately stabbing it in the head and putting it out of its misery. Ellie and Joel leave the store and begin making their way to Bill and Frank's house so that they can ask for supplies. They don't know that Bill and Frank are dead at this point in time. And this is when the story cuts to Bill and Frank's excellent adventure, and we learn how they met and see Bill's ingenuity and his paranoia paired with Frank's nurturing side and craving for normalcy. Frank gets sick and wants to have one last day with Bill, and then they poison themselves. We switch back to the main story of Ellie and Joel as they arrive at Bill and Frank's, and Ellie finds a note on the table that was addressed to Joel in a cheeky way, basically telling Joel that Frank and Bill are no longer here and that Joel needs to be a protector to the people around him, whoever he loves or whoever he can't support. That is his role, that is his duty. And this is kind of a sad moment because Tess has just passed away, and you can tell that Joel feels very responsible for that moment. So while they're actually searching the house to get items, Ellie finds a small pistol that was used during the Bill and Frank episode, and she hides it in her bag away from Joel. She doesn't want him to know that she has it, but she wants to be able to protect Joel or herself if the opportunity arrives. So Ellie and Joel eventually load up the truck, they get their battery, and they make their journey across the country towards Wyoming. Now, the way that episode 4 bears out is nearly perfect from a video game, true to source adaptation to television point of view. There is the perfect amount of focus on our main characters, the perfect amount of deviation from the game's narrative, and the ideal amount of story beats from the game that actually kind of make the story what it is. And that's what I really felt was missing from episode 3, which was literally a love story sandwiched in between an intro and outro with Ellie and Joel. With episode 4, there was the true ebb and flow between main characters, subplots, and other narratives that help give our characters obstacles, challenges, or things to pursue. Unfortunately, things were executed very well. The episode starts off with our two lovely protagonists siphoning gas from old cars on the side of the road, and just like in the previous episodes, Ellie's curiosity for physical violence or perhaps protection is starting to get the best of her while she is now practicing pointing that gun in a nearby building while Joel is getting the gas. Now, this next part might seem a little bit innocuous, but I think it's one of the cornerstones of the relationship between these two, as well for the entire season or this episode in particular. But while Joel is getting gas from the car, Ellie is purposefully trying to annoy him and begins to read her book of puns. And this cute comic relief between the two doesn't go unnoticed and is definitely a pillar between the two as the rest of the episode continues. The scene ends and they are in the truck making their way across the country, and the ever iconic scene of Ellie discovering that adult magazine in the back seat plays out, and honestly it was really funny, and as I have said and will continue to say, the humor here is very necessary for the bleakness brought through the environment. And in fact, I think it's important to note that this is a heavy episode for Ellie. Even though we get to see a lot of her silly side, this play between Ellie's emotions is truly wonderful to see, and the actress does a great job. Eventually, Joel pulls over for the night so that the two of them can get some sleep in the woods, and this is when a bit of foreshadowing creeps in the episode. Ellie asks Joel if they can build a fire to keep warm for the night, and when Ellie is denied that request, she thinks it's due to the infected being able to locate eradicate them via smoke or fire, but it actually has to do with people. In the game, people are much worse than the infected. They are not just violent, but they are intently cruel. Perhaps torturously cruel is a better way to put it. Essentially, all law and order has been lost in this new world, which is a little strange, actually, now that I think about it, because if you think enough time has passed, there would be some semblance of order, but maybe not enough time has passed. Either way, Ellie isn't really used to this threat of violence looming over her head everywhere she goes, but is slowly beginning to grasp it. After they wake up in the morning, they make their way to Kansas City, which is a little different from the video game as they are supposed to go to Pittsburgh instead of Kansas City, but the end result is really still the same. They end up at a roadblock and attempt to get around it in their truck. While attempting their maneuver, they are thwarted by a group of hostiles pretending to be hurt, and then that's really just a ruse so that these bad guys can kill Joel and Ellie and steal all of their belongings. Fortunately, Joel knows this game as he has been on the other end of it, and he tries to speed through these bad guys, but ultimately crashes the truck and gets in a shootout with them. He demands that Ellie goes and hides, and while that's happening, Joel gets attacked from behind. Ellie sneaks out, sees Joel's being choked to death, and grabs that pistol she took from Frank's and shoots this man in the back of his spine. Joel gathers himself and eventually guts this man like a fish. And this is a beautiful moment as we see Ellie, who had seemingly been wanting to help or save Joel for the last few days or hours or whatever. She finally stands up to the plate, takes her shot literally, and it was very hard for her to do. She tears up, she realizes that she has just taken a life, but just like Joel, she bottles it up and did her best to pretend like nothing had ever happened once the moment has passed. Now that Joel and Ellie are on the radar for this group of people, it's time they hatch a plan to escape and get back on the road. But before they do, Joel actually turns to Ellie and apologizes to her for having to kill a man on his behalf. He wants her to retain her youth, and he understands the weight that she now has to carry for the rest of her life, and he doesn't want her to have to live with this burden. So Joel does his best to bare his soul, but he doesn't really know how, and neither does she, which is why their relationship dynamic is so interesting to explore and watch blossom. He also teaches her how to use a gun, which is such a good change of pace compared to the game, which we will discuss after this synopsis. It's kind of both good and bad. Anyways, we're now introduced to two new characters, Perry and Kathleen is the leader of this resistance group, and it's the group that Joel and Ellie just sort of attacked. And now every one of Kathleen's men are after Joel and Ellie to ensure their death. However, Kathleen seems a bit blinded by a personal revenge or something along those lines because she is unable to look at the situation clearly, and she thinks that Joel and Ellie are part of some mercenary group sent to attack them deliberately by somebody she knows or somebody she's looking for. And while this is all going on, there is also a nest infestation underneath our new character's compound or base, and Perry tries to show Kathleen, but unfortunately they can only handle one thing at a time, so they decide to go after Joel and Ellie. And if next episode is anything to go by, it looks like that nest explodes into fury. Ellie and Joel make their way up a building to attempt to hide away from the militia looking after them, and once they make it up to a floor that they deem safe, they hunker down for the night. Now, this might be the most important scene in the whole show, in my opinion. And after Joel and Ellie get ready for bed, they lie down on their respective pillows. Ellie asks Joel if he knows that diarrhea is hereditary. He looks at her confused, and then she says, "It runs in your genes." And then they both laugh, and for the first time, their guards are down. They have officially bonded and become more than just cargo and a transporter. This was done so beautifully, and I only wish it was done a bit sooner. The episode ends with our characters waking up to being held at gunpoint by Henry and Sam, and I gotta say, they seem much more desperate and rigid in this scene, whereas in the game they were a little more careful, but they were relaxed at the same time. But time will tell. We'll see how they develop these characters. So as I alluded to in the introduction, I think that this episode compared to the game was absolutely wonderful. But rather than retread each element in comparison fashion, let's talk about where the major changes took place and what was positive or negative about them. Spoiler, it's almost all positive. If this episode were to actually be a 1-for-1 from the video game, there would have needed to be a ton of stuff crammed into it, making this probably be a whole season's worth of content. I think keeping most of the scene the same with the bad guys pretending to be hurt and getting in a shootout with Joel was definitely the right call. However, I would have loved to see the scene where Joel is about to get stabbed with glass in his throat, but instead flips the bad guy and pushes him onto it instead. I also would have loved to see them kind of skirting around the militia while, they're being chased, only to find infected looming around instead. So fingers crossed for episode 5. It probably won't get that deep, but I'm gonna hope for it. And we also have a few moments in the game fused into one here where Ellie saves Joel's life, but he's actually being drowned in a little pool of water. And while Joel is trying to reach for his gun underwater, Ellie actually grabs it and blows the bad guy's brains to bits. And after Ellie saves Joel's life in the game, Joel is like super resistant to her initially. Ellie is basically begging for him to say thank you or that he was grateful, but he just can't open up to her at all. So I think having Pedro Pascal jump into that nearly right away was the correct thing to do. It humanizes this scenario a lot more and gives Ellie the comfort that she needs rather than waiting for however long inside of the game. We also have the gun handling situation, and in the show, Ellie saving Joel, getting her apology, and getting the gun all takes place in the span of a few minutes, whereas in the game it takes place over a few hours. But all of this makes a lot of sense to be done inside of a television show, so I think it was the right way to go. But to be honest, I think that the way the game presented Ellie with the rifle was a lot more cinematic and just badass than having Joel just, hand her the pistol back. Because in the game, you're sneaking around, taking out dudes while Ellie is sniping people from a sniper's nest. It's just badass, and it's a great way to introduce her to the weapon. Maybe we'll see something like that later, as episodes 4 and 5 seem much more like a part 1 and part 2 than individual episodes, which was more of a vibe up until now. What's really interesting and quite a deviation from the game is giving the bad guys who are after Joel and Ellie a backstory. So Kathleen, who leads the group, and Perry, who is the military commander, so to speak, are trying to take care of these people, and they actually took over a whole Fedra camp, which is a huge ordeal, so they are not to be fucked with. And of course, our main characters stumble into more dangerous territory, go figure. I'm very interested to see and to learn more about Kathleen. I actually really like this actress, as she has been around Hollywood for a long time, all the way back in 2.5 Men, and probably even before that her career started. So she's a really good actress. She's always been great at supporting roles, so it's nice to see her, in something a little more serious and in a world that I am familiar with. Our introduction to Henry and Sam is so brief that there isn't really too much to say about it other than everybody is just getting off on the wrong foot, just like in the game. While there is so much I would have loved to see, the fighting with the turret truck, Joel getting stuck in the underground part of the building and having to fight infected to get back to Ellie, to see Ellie's sniper nest scene, that is so many action sequences that could have been pushed into like 10 episodes. So there's definitely no way to see everything I love, and that's just fine. I get that. I'm just always going to want more and want the best for the show, But with what they did and the tension they built, I absolutely loved episode 4. I was laughing, I was getting sad. There was tons of oh shit moments that I was having to myself. I even caught myself yelling at the television a few times. So it was just a great episode. And the director, Jeremy Webb, is definitely my favorite by far. He is killing it with this particular section of the show. Hopefully we can get Bruce Straley to come to HBO and like be a guest director or something. I don't know. I think he is way more of the brains behind The Last of Us than Neil is, but that's never going to happen. A man can dream, I suppose. Anyways, guys, I think there is a lot to look forward to here with this particular section of the show, at least. And let's hope the producers don't deviate too far from Joel and Ellie, as the focus should be on them primarily. It looks like episode 5 from the preview is going to have tons of action, tons of infected, tons of tension, and probably some tear-jerking moments. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you're enjoying the show. Maybe if you're not enjoying The Last of Us, tell me why down below. Anyways, guys, that's going to do it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Peace out, everybody.